All right, hello everyone, and thank you to all our audience for joining us today. My name is Marshall Reed, and I'm the program manager here at GTI. GTI is a 501c3 nonprofit think tank located in Washington, D.C., dedicated exclusively to Taiwan and Taiwan policy research. Through all our programs, we aim to contribute to a more nuanced, more expansive discussion of Taiwan, its people, and its place in the world. In pursuit of that goal, we provide a wide range of programs. These include our fortnightly publication, the Global Taiwan Brief, our frequent public seminars like this one. We've got 3 podcasts, which are GTI Insights, Taiwan Salon, and Taiwan Security Review, a variety of great cultural programs, and our annual symposium. For researchers that are interested in conducting research on Taiwan, we also offer scholarships and fellowships on a yearly basis. If you're interested in learning more about GTI, I definitely encourage you to check out our website at globaltaiwan.org. Before we jump into today's discussion, I really want to thank all the people that make events like this possible. First, I'd like to thank our co-founders and our donors, as well as our advisory board for all their expert support. I'd also like to thank our fantastic staff and interns who make everything like these events, these publications, all possible. With all that in mind, I'm really thrilled to have this fantastic panel here for a really fascinating and timely conversation on contextualizing Taiwan's role in Central and Eastern Europe. In recent years, the region, Central and Eastern Europe, has really become a crucial fault line in the geopolitical competition between Taiwan and the People's Republic of China. After years of relatively warm ties with the PRC, which included the foundation of the China-led cooperation between China and Central and Eastern European countries, otherwise known as the 16+1, some of the region has recently begun to pull away from Beijing a bit. At the same time, many CEE states have become much more welcoming environments for Taiwan. From Lithuania and the Czech Republic to Slovenia and Slovakia, the region has really become an unexpectedly crucial nexus of support both in Europe and in the world. So in light of this really remarkable and interesting shift, I'm thrilled to be able to be welcoming this really fantastic panel of experts and practitioners from across the region to discuss the factors that have led CEE states to reevaluate their relationships with China and Taiwan, and discuss some opportunities and challenges facing Taiwan as it attempts to capitalize on this newfound support and build more support in this region. Before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to do a bit of shameless self-promotion. I'd like to first note that this event will coincide with the release of a new GTI special report on Central and Eastern Europe's changing approach to Taiwan and China, which myself and a couple co-workers wrote over the last year or so, which will be coming out tomorrow morning. If you're interested in learning more about it, checking it out, I encourage you to visit our website and subscribe to see our updates. So now, without further ado, I want to take a moment to really acknowledge and introduce our really fantastic panelists. So kicking things off today, we'll have Dr. Christina Karanska, who's going to provide a bit of an overview on linkages between Taiwan and CEE states. Dr. Karanska is an assistant professor at Pulaski University in Olomouc in the Czech Republic. In addition to her academic work, she's the advocacy director at the Central European Institute of Asian Studies, or CEIAS, as well as the chair of Amnesty International Slovakia. Previously, she served as a visiting scholar at the University of Taipei, a research assistant at the Institute of China and Asia Pacific Studies, and a lecturer at National Sun Yat-sen University. She received her PhD and master's from National Sun Yat-sen University and an MA and BA from the University of Economics in Bratislava. After that, we're going to turn to Jakub Janda, who will help provide kind of a broader context of China, Taiwan, China, and CEE states, as well as recent developments in the Czech-Taiwan relationship. Jakub is the executive director of the European Values Center for Security Policy, where he specializes in European policy towards Russia and China, as well as the response of democratic states to hostile influence operations. He's delivered expert briefings and testimonies to members of U.S. Congress, the NATO Political Committee, and the European Parliament Special Committee on Foreign Interference. Also note that Jakub last year spent 4 months living in Taipei, where he established a new EVC Taiwan office in January of 2022, which really had the amazing distinction of having EVC be the first European think tank to set up a permanent presence in Taiwan. Right after that, we'll hear from Philip Schiebach, who provide an overview of really a big part of this discussion, which is China and its complex and controversial position in the region. Philip is a project manager and China research fellow at the Association for International Affairs in the Czech Republic, where he works on the MAP Influence and China Observers in Central and Eastern Europe, or CHOICE projects. Previously, he worked for the Slovak research institution Stratpol and CEIAS, and was a fall 2022 SIPA James S. Denton Fellow in Washington, D.C. Shiba graduated in Chinese Cultural Studies and International Relations from Maastricht University in Brno, Czech Republic, and Renmin University in Beijing. And closing things out, last but certainly not least, we'll hear from Dr. Agnes Schunemar, who's going to share her expertise on a really important dynamic here, which is the economic factors that underlie both Taiwan and China's approaches to CEE states. Dr. Schunemar is an associate professor at Corvinus University in Budapest. In addition, she serves as the head of the research group on development economics at the Institute of World Economics with the Center for Economic and Regional Studies in Hungary. She's led and participated in several international and Hungarian research projects and is a member of the European Cooperation in Science and Technology Action China and Europe Research Network, where she's the head of the working group on strategic sectors and infrastructure developments. She's also a member of China Observers in Central and Eastern Europe. She received her PhD and MA from Corvinus University in Budapest, as well as an MA from Udvar-Loránd University. Before we begin, I'd like to tell all of our audience and make it clear that we really do value your input and want to hear from you throughout this event. So if you do have a question for our panel, you can post them in our YouTube chat, email them to contact@globaltaiwan.org, or tweet at us at @globaltaiwan. So without further ado, I really want to jump right into everything and hear from our fantastic panelists. So Christina, go ahead and kick things off.
Okay, thank you very much for having me. Let me share the presentation. Not sure if you can see it. Okay, can you see it? Okay, just let me please know if you can see the presentation well.
Looks good here.
Okay, wonderful. So let me tell you about CEE-Taiwan relations. So they have been warming in recent years, and you might remember the vaccine donations based on which Lithuania, together with Czechia, Poland, and Slovakia, gained quite substantial political goodwill among the Taiwanese elites and also the population. And the cooperation continues. So here you can see a chart according to the data collected by our EU-Taiwan relations tracker. The EU recorded a significant increase in its Taiwan-related activity. In 2019, only 23 interactions were recorded across the entire EU. These were governmental, parliamentary, military, economic, cultural engagements, as well as mutual visits. In 2022, despite recovering from a pandemic, the number increased more than sevenfold with 167 recorded interactions. Okay, and CEE countries were major contributors to this increase, responsible for almost 60% of all interactions in 2022. This has been mostly thanks to the activities of the so-called Dumpling Alliance. This is a term dubbed by the Taiwan Digital Diplomacy Association and encompasses 4 countries: Lithuania, Slovakia, Czechia, and Poland. Notice here that Czechia and Poland have more yearly engagement with Taiwan than major EU member states such as France or Germany. The heightened activity include frequent visits to and from Taiwan by high-profile political actors, the conclusion of intergovernmental agreements and MOUs, as well as the establishment of new sister city agreements, investment and trade promotion frameworks. For example, just last month, the second Taiwan-Lithuania economic dialogue took place in Taipei, highlighting the ambition to deepen trade relations between the two. Then just a few weeks prior to this, there was a Lithuanian high-level delegation in Taiwan to expand cooperation in technology. And in January, Taiwan's digital minister, Audrey Tang, visited various Lithuanian parliamentary groups, and she also met with Lithuania's Minister of Economy and Innovation. Then, as we all probably know, Tsai Ing-wen spoke on the phone with Czech now President Petr Pavel. Then 2 days later, Foreign Minister Joseph Wu spoke with Czechia's Chamber of Deputies Speaker Markéta Pekarová-Adamová. They discussed bilateral partnership, potential areas of cooperation, as well as Adamova's scheduled trip to Taiwan. Then there is also Taiwan's Central and Eastern European Investment Fund called Taiwania Capital. It's worth 200 million US dollars, and it approved a few investments already, 2 in Lithuania and 1 in Slovakia, into companies, laser, robotics, and AI companies. There's also Taiwan Central and Eastern European Loan Fund, which approved millions worth loans. And among new interactions is also the new direct flight. So Taiwan's China Airlines will start operation of direct Prague-Taipei flights from mid-July, so quite soon. And these are only a few examples. If you want to know about specific engagements, you can go to our EU Taiwan tracker, www.eu-taiwan-tracker.sayas.eu. You have it written on the slide. It's an online tool tracking mutual engagement of Taiwan and 27 EU member states from 2019 onwards. These engagements can be filtered by country or by topic or by both. And actually, you can find on this website also analysis related to Taiwan-EU relations in the analysis section. Let me also show you the results of our latest SEAS report about CEE-Taiwan relations. We mapped 12 countries, 12 CEE countries, you can see them on the map, and their relations with Taiwan. Based on these countries' willingness to engage Taiwan politically and economically, there emerged 3 types of countries: the vanguards, the pragmatists, and the laggards. So the vanguards are countries with an increased activity level in both political and economic relations with Taiwan over the last 3 to 5 years. These countries were spurred by increasing skepticism about China's ability to deliver economic benefits and turned to Taiwan with quite high visibility political interactions, having led to the establishment of new economic partnerships in investment, trade, as well as research and development. So these are basically the countries that have generated so many entries into our EU-Taiwan tracker that I showed you earlier. Then the second group, the pragmatists, include those countries that are quite vary for a variety of reasons to pursue political relations with Taiwan, yet these countries enjoy beneficial economic relations. These countries also present the most interesting puzzle because their economic engagement with Taiwan at times overcomes even that of the vanguard countries, but without showing a strong willingness to promote Taiwan in their political agenda. And the third group, we have the laggards, countries with comparatively underdeveloped relations with Taiwan in both political and economic domains, without any indication of near-term change. Their approach to Taiwan, or the lack of thereof, is motivated by different factors. For example, the view that any interaction with Taiwan will automatically antagonize and disrupt their respective trade relations with China. So while all this sounds quite good, right, at least in terms of the vanguards, how about mutual awareness? That is quite limited, at least for the V4 countries, 3 of which are also vanguards. So with my colleagues, I have conducted a public opinion survey on relations between Taiwan and the V4 countries. This has been done by SEAS in partnership with the Sinophone Borderlands project of the Palatsky University. I work at both of these institutions. And we had over 1,300 respondents in each country, so Slovakia, Hungary, Poland, Czechia, and Taiwan, of course. And in all these countries, our data is nationally representative in terms of gender, age, and region. So the survey showed us that overall, there is limited mutual knowledge and awareness among Taiwan and the V4 countries. However, there are positive trends that both sides can build upon to improve their images further. In Taiwan, the V4 countries are already seen positively. In turn, Taiwan is perceived neutrally among the V4 countries. In Taiwan, voters of the DPP are more favorable towards the V4 countries than voters of the KMT. And among the V4 countries, political divisions are especially visible in Czechia and Slovakia, and to a lesser degree in Poland. Interestingly, there are no visible differences between voters of Hungary's governing Fidesz party and its opposition, despite Prime Minister Viktor Orban's cozying up to China over the past decade. And in both Taiwan and the V4 countries, higher education and political interests, these two, correlate with more positive views on the other side. So this suggests that those with more awareness and knowledge of the other side tend to be more positive toward it. So the findings here suggest that efficient public diplomacy, which would spread awareness about Taiwan and the V4 countries on both sides, can further improve the mutual image and understanding between the two sides. So let me stop my presentation now and let me pass on the word to the next panelist.
Great. Well, Christine, I think that was a really good overview of what's a really complex and really interesting thing to follow. And I think the way you made it clear is that this is just getting started. This is a new thing. It's really over the last couple of years, and the countries are kind of going at it at their different paces and have different factors that are influencing them. But really amazing start, and I definitely encourage everybody to check out the CEIS's EU Taiwan tracker. I use it a lot. It's very good. So with that note, I'd like to turn over to Jakob to bring China into the conversation and bring the Czech Republic into the conversation and delve a little bit deeper into these issues. So Jakob, over to you.
Thank you, Marshall and the GGI for hosting me. So I'll jump into it. Basically, what we saw was a major Chinese effort in much of Central Eastern Europe for, let's say, conducting elite capture operations, promising investment, while in many ways trying to buy political influence in many of the countries in Central Eastern Europe, and seeing what sticks, seeing who stays, who will be willing to become a Chinese de facto proxy. At the end, there has been much of not much of success for China in this field. I would say the only country where China has been able to achieve strategic influence in the government and proxies is Hungary in Central Eastern Europe. There are a couple of others, but Hungary is the only one which is paying off for China in a way of strategic and elite capture investment. In other countries, we see that there has been a lot of pushback, and I think Czech Republic is a prime example of that. We have had a very pro-CCP or pro-PRC government since approximately 2014 till 2021, approximately, with a couple of changes. We have had a president who openly supported engaging with the PRC regardless of all the consequences, including fighting the domestic security agencies, let's say, on behalf of the Chinese intelligence apparatus and companies like Huawei, for example. That's what we had in Czech Republic for quite many years. But that actually led to a de facto political protest by the opposition parties, the center-right opposition parties, which approximately around 2018 and 19 started to engage with Taiwan. First, I would say it was mainly out of protest against the governing coalition, but then it developed into what today is a de facto state policy of the Czech Republic to Taiwan. And I'll try to explain what it means in practice. Is that I mean, where we are in the case of Czech Republic now is that we will next week, actually there's a huge delegation, more than 150 members going to Taiwan, led by a Czech Speaker of the Czech Chamber of Deputies, and it's actually the second speaker of the Czech Chamber of Parliament going to Taiwan after the first one went in late 2020. We are currently the only European country which will actually have two speakers visiting Taiwan in a couple of years. I understand that Lithuania will send its speaker very soon to Taiwan as well, but that's what we see on the Czech side. What it means is that we have actually a pro-Taiwan majority in both chambers of the Czech Parliament, which is pretty good, which allows the speaker and many others like chairs of committees to go. Because you always need a vote at the end on these matters. But what I think is even more relevant is that we actually currently have a government coalition which is openly stating in the official government program that support of Taiwan is the government's policy. It's in the government manifesto. It's also in the Czech government's Indo-Pacific strategy. So it already became a government's policy to engage with Taiwan and naming Taiwan by name, which is something unusual. We have seen Lithuania do the similar thing in the government manifesto. But I believe no one really else in Europe on this. It means that, for example, we have foreign ministers of Czech Republic and Taiwan directly talking to each other. Quite often it's private, but it is happening. We have had Czech defense minister publicly saying that she'll be very happy to meet the Taiwanese defense minister, which is pretty unusual for a NATO or at least a European NATO member state to do so. And as Christina mentioned, President-elect of Czech Republic, Petr Pavel, had an open, direct, and publicly acknowledged phone call with President Tsai. And what I think is even more relevant here is that he said publicly that he is looking forward to meet President Tsai in person, which says that there'll be a presidential meeting. And that's something what is now being hotly discussed in Prague. I think that's the political part. What we also have is the economic cooperation, which is quite substantial already. Taiwan is actually a 6-time bigger investor in Czech Republic compared to the PRC in number of jobs created over the last 20 years. So that's something what is a good substance to the relationship for the beginning. And now the political effort on the Czech side will be to actually transform the political support for Taiwan into meaningful economic relations. That's why we have such big trade delegations going to Taiwan. And there, again, politically speaking, the important part is that those are not only small companies, but it's also the leaderships of the largest business associations of the Czech Republic, who have been very hesitant, reluctant in the past, because many of their big members, big companies in the Czech Republic have relied on the Chinese market. So they basically stopped the large business associations from visiting Taiwan openly, for example, which is already happening now. So that's a good thing happening too. We also finally have a military-to-military cooperation. So there's an official cooperation between Czech and Taiwanese defense universities, which was approved by defense ministers of both sides, which is quite unique, I have to say, because many Europeans would say that their one China policy interpretation means that there shouldn't be any security or defense relations with Taiwan. So I wouldn't overestimate it. It's still just the beginning. It's not like delivering weapons in a big scale like the US are doing, but it is substantial that it is happening, and it's publicly acknowledged as well. We have cyber agencies officially cooperating between Taiwan and Czech Republic. Actually, the leadership of the Czech Cyber Agency is visiting Taiwan officially quite soon as well, and other high-level security officials from Czech Republic are going to Taiwan, because they are basically two, I would say, items, two things which the Czech political and security leadership wants from Taiwan. One is the economic cooperation domain, and it pretty much means getting Czech companies into the Taiwanese market. That's pretty much what they want. And the second part is effectively getting some of the Taiwanese knowledge about the PRC in the security domain, in cyber, in economic coercion, and similar knowledge which Taiwan has is willing to share it only with the core allies, which is US and Japan. And we hope that that's something what might be happening, and Taiwan might be, Taiwanese agencies would be, for political reasons, now willing to actually start sharing this knowledge with their Czech counterparts. So we'll see if it starts happening. So just to finish up, what we could expect from the Czech Republic on this field, one is the speaker's visit, actually in 2 weeks. That's something really big, not only politically but mainly for the trade relations. We could actually expect to be the front runner on the security relations, which as I tried to mention, that's something what is very interesting for other European allies because none of them actually have this kind of level of cooperation. And so it's kind of a testing case how much it will be seen as beneficial, how much Czech agencies will say, okay, cooperating with Taiwan makes sense to us on a substantive level, not only for symbolic reasons. So that's the big thing. That's a big test, I would say, to see if it pays off. And then I think the visible part of the political relations will be the possible meeting between Czech and Taiwanese presidents in the future, which was already announced. It will take some time, I understand, so it will not be happening next week. But I think that's the plan, and we all know that President Tsai is finishing her term in, I believe, May next year. So I think there is more like a year to do it. So we'll take some time for developing this. And to finish up, there is the Czech government's policy being developed now because the new Czech government coalition actually promised to actually conduct what they call a review of Czech-China policy, which also means put in practice what exactly Czech Republic will want to achieve in their relationship with Taiwan. Because it's not only a relationship to Taiwan, it's basically also part of our transatlantic relations with the US, as it is for Lithuania, for example. So it's a full package which is being now privately discussed in Prague.
Well, Jakub, that's great. It's been really fascinating to watch the Czech Republic go from the sort of halting approach to Taiwan with, Speaker Vystočil going to Taiwan and it being more controversial to it really expanding into this sort of whole of government approach to Taiwan with, the recent elections and Pavel. So it's going to be really interesting watching going forward. You've given us a lot to be excited for. So we can only hope that things continue to unfold and continue to build on what they are right now. So right now, I want to talk about really what is always the elephant in the room when it comes to Europe and really around the world when you're talking about Taiwan, which is China. And like I said in my introduction, and like both of our first speakers have talked about, China still plays a large role in this region. It still has strong ties with a lot of countries. It's still, as Jakub said, still exerting these kind of attempts at elite capture. So, Philip, I want to turn to you to talk a little bit about the current state of China's position in the region. What is China doing? What is it attempting to do, and how successful is it being?
Sure. Thank you very much also for the invitation. Very happy to be here with also excellent colleagues. And thank you also to them for their presentations. I'll also follow up on something that Jakub mentioned, but then talk mostly about Taiwan. My unfortunate role is to talk about China, when we should be talking about Taiwan as an actor on its own, but it's always comes to it in the end. But actually, like we're talking about what's happening right now, but there's a lot of historical reminiscences, to actually early 1990s, when Taiwan was actually trying to capitalize on, the post-communism, basically the region emerging from communism, and also was actually hoping to establish diplomatic relations with countries in the region. We have seen the establishment of the early establishment of the representative offices of Taiwan in the region. So, like, this is not really something as new as someone might observe on the first look, but it's quite interesting that again, also from the Taiwan's perspective, it definitely sees an opening in the region to develop relationship, and it's based on the fact that the region is by and large disappointed with China, and I'll get to why that is the case. So basically, the framework for China's cooperation with the region for the past 10 years has been the 17+1, or whatever you call it, China-Sea cooperation format that was established in 2012. We've had, of course, the exit of the Baltic countries. Now Czech Republic is also kind of on the fence about leaving, and I would say that in reality we're really talking about 2+1 in terms of the enthusiasm for a cooperation with China, which is Hungary, which was mentioned, and also Serbia, also of course outside of the EU. We have seen China in the past year send several damage control missions in the region. They have not been very successful, you might say. Of course, the new factor that has been added over the past year has been the China's position on Ukraine, which has been kind of the last straw for many countries. In the Czech Republic, of course, it's very much a big issue, but also in other countries. So as for the China-CE cooperation format, basically some of the issues that have been related to it are kind of related to how it has been functioning from the very beginning and how it's been established. So it's not really been a multilateral format, no matter how China likes to call it, but it's been bilateral multilateralism. It's kind of a hub and spoke system where the multilateral part is China meeting with the CE countries, but not really any coordination going on between the CE countries themselves. There's the secretariat that coordinates the work at the Chinese MFA, which also speaks to how it really works. Still, in terms of the Chinese approach to the region, you might say it's not really been such a well thought out, long-term strategy, as we always like to say. Think about China having a long-term plan, really, crossing the river, touching the stones. So it's been more like at the very beginning, China announced the initiative and then kind of let also different actors kind of fill it in with meaning, also kind of organically developed, which has been related to the immense proliferation of different contexts. So the most famous or most notable part is, of course, the annual meetings of head of states, prime ministers, or presidents. But there's been like so many different formats. Whether it's regional cooperation, whether it's small and medium businesses, whether it's universities, all kinds of different formats, even like China CE dance camps and stuff like that, which really attests to the wide scope of the format. Of course, many CE countries at the time, they appreciated the opportunity to have the opportunity to speak directly to China, which they did not really have before. To have some kind of framework for meetings. At the same time, like the proliferation of these different formats has not really been met with the actual results. And then I'm getting to really the problems that have kind of popped out during the course of the cooperation. So the very first kind of original thing of the initiative is that the CE countries have mostly had economic interests in their cooperation with China, not really much of strategic interests in having China as a strategic partner. The strategic partnerships that have been established notwithstanding, but their understanding of China was very mostly through the prism of economic partner in source of investment and potential export market, but not really strategic partner. And also, this also means that when the economic results did not come, the foreign policy of these countries has changed quite suddenly. Another problem, the Chinese kind of conceptual misunderstanding of the whole region, where it has approached it as kind of as it does the countries of Global South. So talking about China-CE cooperation as part of South-South cooperation, which China is used to in Africa or Latin America. And this is, of course, also related to the economic offer that China kind of presented to the region, which has not really been very appealing because the huge loans that China can offer in Africa, Latin America are not really that appealing, especially for the EU countries, which have much better sources of financing. And also more broadly, there's not been really that much complementarity in terms of economic interest on both sides, where there's not like huge deposits, of raw materials, which China is interested in, usually in Africa or Latin America, South Asia. And on the other side, there's also not that many, high technology or advanced, good brands, established brands that China wants to acquire in Western Europe, let's say. So this has also resulted in the cooperation not really achieving the results that many countries kind of expected. Another factor, of course, and we're seeing also the results of this right now, the worsening view of China related to the growing, domestic oppression in China, of course, regarding the Uyghurs, the situation in Hong Kong, also basically in general the aggressive foreign policy of China, also towards Taiwan. And the last straw, as I said, really the support of China for Russia, tacit support, of course, not outright support. And we're not really just talking about the China's position on the war itself, but just a few, basically a short time before the outbreak of the war, the meeting in Olympic Beijing, where basically China supported very broadly Russia's strategic interest in Central and Eastern Europe, which in a sense basically meant the organization of the European security architecture, scaling back NATO to pre-1997 borders, which meant that China basically positioned itself on the very opposite side of the existential security interests of the CE countries, which of course is a big thing and something, a far cry from what I believe many countries in the region expected 10 years ago. Still, of course, right now we have in the region, because of, these factors, I kind of have a different role in different countries, of course, different impact. So we still have different, approaches. We have also seen, for example, with Lithuania, it was kind of very high profile about its exit from the 17th cooperation, whereas Estonia, Latvia were kind of more low profile in that. We see other countries that kind of don't really see any sense in cooperation or any practical results. For example, as Albania, just a few days ago, a statement from Prime Minister, but they don't really want to leave either. And that's also kind of, Poland, which still sees itself as kind of like a leader in the region, wants to have keep the relationship with China, despite its position on Ukraine. So it's kind of a complicated picture. And regarding what we can expect in the future in terms of the development of the format itself, but also of general ties between China and the region. So first scenario basically is dissolution of the format itself. I don't think that's likely. That would be a huge hit to China's image, of course. That's not really what you do. You can transfer the initiative to something else, or you can just, change in some ways, but not really, say it, okay, we're done here. So that's not very likely to happen. I think it's more likely is some kind of hibernation, which we're probably seeing right now already. So we see also during the Chinese diplomatic missions, the focus, they're saying, let's focus on practical results, let's kind of put the cooperation on the sideline, downscale the meetings. We've heard talks about the ministerial meetings as opposed to, head of state level meetings. So basically there's this effort to, not put it too much, seeing that the countries are not that interested anymore. And the last scenario, again, which kind of is not contradictory with the second one, is the revival of cooperation. And we're seeing also that China is now trying to mend ties with Europe. Recently, also the so-called peace proposal on Ukraine is kind of also part of that. And we should not really exclude the possibility that down the road there's some other opportunity in the region where China can still bring something new to the table. Right now, it doesn't seem very likely. But another economic crisis in Europe, another opportunity for China, for example, to step in. So right now it looks quite bad in the region for China overall, with some exceptions. But I would still not exclude the possibility that there's still some potential for China to get back to its earlier position.
Great. Well, Philip, like you said, it's a complicated situation there, but I think there was a tendency, years back when the 16+1, 17+1 was, just being founded, just getting started. I think in the U.S. at least, there's a lot of concern that this was a really masterminded plan by China, the really concerted effort to establish itself in CEE countries. But I think you painted a good picture that it was, much more complex than that and much more flawed than that, and there were a lot more, issues facing China as it tried to establish itself. I want to turn now to Agnes for something that I think all of our presenters so far have touched on that's really a big determinant of CE countries' approach to China, and now their approach to Taiwan, which is economics. Economics and trade really, provides a lot of influence and really does motivate a lot of these countries, particularly, an interesting case with Hungary. And so I'm so excited to hear more from Agnes about, what are the current state of economic ties between China and CEE states, and now Taiwan and CEE states, and hear a little bit more about Hungary as well. So Agnes, over to you.
Thank you very much for having me as well. Let me share a few graphs with you, so as you can learn a bit more about the already mentioned economic ties. So I decided to make a comparison between China and Taiwan in CEE, and I decided to pick, when it comes to the trade graphs, at least 2 vanguards and 1 pragmatist country, as just briefly link the topic to Christina's presentation. Since Czechia, Hungary, and Poland seems to be the 5 most important trading partners of both Taiwan and China, of course, size does matter here. China is far bigger when it comes to trade volumes as well than Taiwan. That is, both imports and exports are in a different category, in a different level. But still, you can see from the early 2000s a trend that is an increasing trend when it comes to exports to China from CEE, and when it comes to exports to Taiwan as well. Here, it is important to emphasize that the majority of those export products are generated by multinationals with a presence in Central and Eastern Europe, and not by local companies. So the majority of the Central and Eastern European exports to Taiwan or China are not necessarily Central and Eastern European products, but with a slight Central and Eastern European value added. Those are German products or French products or US products, since those are assembled here in Central and Eastern Europe and then exported either to Taiwan or China. When it comes to the import side, of course, this is the stronger part of the trade relations. That is, of course, there is a slight trade deficit in the CE-Taiwanese relations as well, and an even bigger trade deficit when it comes to CE-China trade relations. When comparing Central and Eastern Europe's trade with China and Taiwan, and here let me just show you the next graph, we can conclude that Poland, that is the biggest country in Central and Eastern Europe, is the largest recipient of both Chinese and Taiwanese imports. Poland is followed by the Czech Republic and Hungary. On the export side, it is again Poland, followed by Czechia and Hungary that exports the most to China, but it is Czechia that exports the most to Taiwan, followed by Poland and Hungary. When it comes to, as I've mentioned, the Central and Eastern European countries' exports to either countries, again, let's emphasize that it is generated by local subsidiaries of multinational companies, that is not by Central and Eastern European owned companies. This is important to emphasize because even if there is a political aim of having, let's say, better relations with Taiwan or better relations with China, it will not necessarily appear on the level of export data, since it is not necessarily the decision of local governments, but it is the decision of headquarters in Berlin or in different type of other European cities or even US cities, where that export will go from Central and Eastern European countries. Potentially more interesting topic is FDI, for indirect investment, since both China and Taiwan kind of picked the Central and Eastern European region a while ago and keep on investing in these countries. While smaller Taiwanese companies established their Central and Eastern European presence already in the 1990s, in the early 90s, let's say, bigger companies, especially Taiwanese multinational companies, gained their foothold here after the millennium, at exactly the same time when Chinese companies started to approach to the region. So at the time of the new opening up of China, when they became members of the World Trade Organization and started to invest more into Europe, especially into Central and Eastern Europe. By 2020, Central and Eastern European countries accumulated almost 6 billion USD Chinese and more than 2.5 billion USD Taiwanese foreign direct investment, of which Hungary received the most, followed by Czechia and Poland. So here again, in this graph, you can see those small countries, the three countries, since these are the biggest recipients of Chinese and Taiwanese investments. Interestingly, as you can see it on the graph, the numbers of companies show a somewhat opposite trend. The number of Chinese companies is the highest in Poland, followed by Hungary and Czechia, while the number of Taiwanese companies is the highest in Czechia, followed by Poland and Hungary. That is, Hungary has the highest stock of foreign direct investment from both China and Taiwan, while it hosts only a third as many Chinese companies as Poland and a quarter as many Taiwanese companies as the Czech Republic. The explanation is relatively simple. Hungary hosts mainly big multinational companies from both China and Taiwan, with each of these investments having a relatively high value, while Poland and Czechia hosts mainly smaller companies. Again, it has to be emphasized that Chinese investments are still dwarfed by, for example, German multinationals' investment into these countries. So when we calculate the percentage share, we found that Chinese FDI stock is around or below 1% of total inward FDI stock in Central and Eastern Europe. It is above 1% only in the case of Hungary for the already mentioned reasons. Let's go on to the next one. This is a table that summarizes the major pull factors of the Chinese and Taiwanese companies in Central and Eastern Europe. I've made interviews with companies based in Poland, Czechia, and Hungary, but I can say that this is kind of typical or characteristic for the whole Central and Eastern European regions. So when it comes to those factors that attract companies to the Central and Eastern European region, we decided to differentiate between macroeconomic pull factors, institutional and political pull factors. Based on my interviews, Chinese and Taiwanese companies are attracted mainly by macroeconomic factors to Central and Eastern European countries. These factors are, among others, market access to the whole EU, so not just to Central and Eastern Europe, relatively low labor costs, and the qualification of the labor force as well, and also company level relations. Nevertheless, institutional factors such as free trade agreements, institutional stability, tax incentives, or any other type of incentives, and the activities of investment promotion agencies are also important for both Chinese and Taiwanese companies. And political factors, such as the level of political relations between the company's home country and the respective host country, political gestures or confidence building measures, seem to play an important role only for the Chinese companies, that these are not as important or not at all important for the Taiwanese companies when looking for an investment destination to Central and Eastern Europe. We have been talking about the political relations, so let me just briefly refer to that. So in Central and Eastern European countries, Chinese companies tend to invest in politically friendly countries more, while it invests less in countries that make, for instance, critical statements about China from time to time. But economic relations do not really have an impact on political ties. That is, more Chinese investment doesn't necessarily result in better political relations between China and the respective Central and Eastern European countries. Political or diplomatic relations seems to be much more influenced by various international trends, EU-level processes or decisions, or even the US stance. Hungary, of course, seems to be an exception here, at least in a sense that it goes against the EU trends quite often and doesn't see engagement with China as risky as other European countries or as other Central and Eastern European countries do. Still, even in the Hungarian case, we do not see evidence that economic relationship is positively affecting the political relations, since Hungarian-Chinese political relations have been consistently good over the past 2 decades or over the past 23 years, while China's economic presence is still not significant compared to, for instance, that of Germany or the US or any other Western European countries. While for the Chinese, political ties tend to affect economic relations rather than vice versa, we couldn't really find evidence of political factors affecting the location decisions of Taiwanese companies in Central and Eastern Europe. In fact, Taiwanese companies seemed to make such decisions based on other criteria. Big Taiwanese multinationals act in a highly pragmatic manner in Central and Eastern Europe, which means that they do not really take care or take account of political relations, but focus purely on business interests. If they receive more investment incentives in Hungary, they choose that over Czechia, even if the latter is politically more friendly than the former. Another interesting link was revealed during the interviews, that is, the majority of those big Taiwanese multinational companies with a presence in Central and Eastern Europe have a connection to China, either a subsidy on the mainland or cooperation at the global level. And it seems that these Taiwanese companies are often leveraging these contacts and tend to locate where other Chinese companies are locating. Similarly, these Taiwanese multinationals do not want to risk their already existing relations with Chinese multinationals. They are keeping a low profile, if you like, in CEE, and do not emphasize or even hide their Taiwanese-ness. Consequently, we couldn't really find evidence of economic interactions affecting diplomatic relations between Taiwan and Central and Eastern Europe. And let's go on to the final conclusions, if you like, of the economic relationship between CEE and both Taiwan and China. Although, as I've mentioned, it seems that neither political or economic relations have an impact on one another in the Taiwan-CEE case, those developments we have already mentioned in the past 1 hour may affect economic interactions. Lithuania, Czechia, Poland, and Slovakia sent COVID vaccines to Taiwan during the pandemic, and in return, Taipei sent a delegation to 3 of these countries, which was a business delegation as well. Of course, with a possibility that it may end up in more investments or more business deals. Based on, again, those interviews I've made, there may be a chance for Taiwanese investment to contribute to better political relations with CEE countries in the future. And the majority of those interviewees believe that if Taiwanese investment were introduced in sectors other than manufacturing and assembly, since Taiwanese investments are targeting the very same industry that Chinese or German companies are targeting, that is manufacturing and assembly. But if these investments were introduced in sectors other than manufacturing, in high technology, for instance, in innovation, in R&D, that could possibly have a positive spillover effect on political relations, since then Taiwanese investors, Taiwanese companies would be different from the aforementioned Chinese ones. And here I would stop sharing as well, and of course look forward to questions.
Great. Well, Agnes, I think that's a great overview of, again, what is a very complicated thing. And it is interesting that you draw the distinction that there is, a very big distinction between these economic factors and these political factors. They're linked in some ways, but in other ways it's a bit unclear. I think I'm excited to delve a bit more deeper into it as we go forward. I want to turn now to a bit of a Q&A session. And again, I'd like to remind our audience out there that we really do want to hear from you. We really want to make this an interactive conversation. So if you do have a question for our panelists, feel free to submit it in our YouTube chat, by email to contact@globaltaiwan.org, or tweet at us at @globaltaiwan. So I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative. I have lots of questions, but I won't ask all of them. But I want to start a bit broadly and kind of pose this to all of our panelists here. just that something that we're always curious here is that as we've seen countries around the world, become a bit more wary of Chinese influence in the wake of, COVID-19, in the wake of Wolf Warrior diplomacy, so-called. It's been interesting to see to what degree that's linked to support for Taiwan afterwards. It's a bit unclear at times if they are in fact linked. So I'd be curious to hear in Central European states, to what degree is, rising distrust for China connected to growing interest in building relations with Taiwan? Are countries that are growing wary of China, correspondingly becoming more interested in Taiwan, or are they more distinct? And whoever's interested in starting off with that. Jakob?
I can start. I mean, in the Czech case, it's quite clear. It's basically first China was in, then there was a protest in the opposition parties, and then it basically the Taiwan policy took over. So it's quite clear. It is a zero-sum game in the Czech case. I believe in Lithuania too, but the only country I see which is trying to have it both ways is Poland, because actually we do see, and not always everything is visible publicly, but we do see some of the efforts from the Polish government to actually engage with Taiwan, but then at the same time, initiatives which are quite often proposed by Lithuania or Czech Republic are being taken very reluctantly by the Polish government, mainly by President Duda's office. Not the foreign ministry in Poland seems to be quite active on Taiwan and willing, but the presidential office in Poland is stopping many things in engaging between Taiwan and Poland. So, and clearly one of the things is the hope for some of the Chinese investment to Poland, which many of the other allies in this region are scratching their heads because they are thinking, like, well, Poland is such a great ally in Russia. Why can they actually start having a comprehensive China policy and Taiwan policy, at least in some things? But Poland is not seen as a good ally by those countries, or even by the US on China. They are, I think, some of the pragmatic hopes still. I think it will take time, but it will change. But still, there are differences, and they are not vocal publicly because we are trying to be good allies on Russia because of the war in Ukraine. But that the kind of disruption is happening on the government level too.
Christina?
Let me give you a slightly different example from Slovakia about your question whether there's a correlation between the disillusionment of Chinese investment promises. So, for example, in Slovakia, the stance on China and Taiwan is very dependent on the domestic situation. So, for example, before there was a very China-friendly government, but this was mostly motivated by catering to anti-Western ideas. And then in 2020, there were elections, which brought a shift domestically, and the government is now much more active on Taiwan. And we're expecting elections very soon, probably in September of this year. So it will be very interesting what happens with the new government. For now, in the political campaigning, so we can't really see anything on China, Taiwan, because it's more dominated by the war in Ukraine. So they're using rather this. So there's more focus on Russia and Ukraine, not so much on China or Taiwan.
Great. Does anybody else want to weigh in?
Yeah, maybe if I can just follow up, and that's actually, I think, what the research that Christina presented also shows that pretty well. I think we have the cases like Czech Republic where the view on China and Taiwan is pretty much quite different based on political preferences. I would say that in these countries, and that's like a big factor in explaining why basically the worsening view of China results also in increased willingness to cooperate with Taiwan. It's not the same in all the countries. I think, for example, in Czech Republic, again, something I know the most, but I think it's also a unique case in the region. For example, I always use this example, so sorry to someone who has heard that, but during anti-government demonstrations, you had people waving, the flags of Republic of China, which is kind of a symbol of something here, and also the research has shown, again, coming back to that, and I looked at it, that in general public it's not such a big topic, but in terms of political parties that have some kind of established worldview, it's very much the case. I mean, for broader population, I would not. It would be interesting to actually see, whether there's this link. I would not think so, but in terms of political actors, I think the link is quite obvious there.
Interesting. All right, Agnes?
Yeah, just briefly, there hasn't been any shift politically in Hungary, which you're probably aware of. Still, I think that we need to make a distinction when it comes to political or economic relationship with Taiwan. It seems that when it comes to political relationship, the Hungarian government is pretty much in line with the one China policy and insists on having relations only with China. But when it comes to the economic packages offered to various multinational companies coming from Asia, although those are rather confidential, but at least based on my interviews and based on various assumptions, I believe that these are pretty much the same packages offered for the Taiwanese companies and for the Chinese companies. And this is one of the reasons why Hungary hosts so many Taiwanese multinational companies. So when it comes to economic relationship with China, Hungary also seems to be pretty much pragmatic.
Interesting. Yeah, I think pragmatism is a good guiding principle for the way a lot of these countries are approaching this. I want to seize on something that a dynamic that Jakub brought up, particularly in Poland, where you've got a president that's much more wary of establishing relations with Taiwan, while you've got a legislator that's more interested in building relations with Taiwan. That seems like a dynamic that comes up not just in Central and Eastern Europe, but around the world, where you've got kind of a bifurcated approach to China and Taiwan, where there's part of the government that's interested in Taiwan, another part that's interested in China. It's been interesting to see, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe, these sort of subnational level linkages between Taiwan and these countries, whether it's city to city diplomacy, it's these more sort of people to people ties. Be curious to hear, going forward, do you see more opportunities for Taiwan to build these kind of lower level but still really important ties with counterparts in CEE states? And again, that's open to everybody.
I mean, if I can start, I mean, that's again definitely seen that in the Czech Republic, direct relations, the revocation of the agreement with Beijing and in Prague, and the establishment of relationship with Taipei. So of course, this is also in many ways related. We've actually done research with Maciej Zimalczyk from CEAS and other colleagues on the local level ties with China. So I haven't done research on Taiwan specifically. So this is something I know in Brno. They're also exploring the possibility of having a partner in Taiwan, I think. So this is something that's also coming to the agenda as part of, and you've mentioned it, like this all government approach. So there's interest from different actors. So it's not just the government, it's the academic institutions and so on. Czech Republic, again, is a very good case in this, where you have a push at different levels. So I think this will be also a new thing on the agenda, and it's many times it's also very much connected to the economic expectations again, because there's a lot of expectations from Taiwan, especially in high tech, semiconductors, of course. So this will drive some of that interest, and as we have seen actually with China, the research that we've done on China, there's been a lot of interest in attracting Chinese investments into the local economy, getting jobs into the local economy. So like we have analogical developments here as well.
Great, Christina.
So these soft power tools that could be used between the CEE countries and Taiwan are, let's say, underdeveloped. Just speaking about the sister city agreements, I have a map here in front of me and I will tell you there's a couple of sister cities. So for example, Kaohsiung's sister city is Bratislava, then Tainan has a sister city in Poland. Taipei has Prague, but then it also has Warsaw, Vilnius, and Riga. Taidong has Debrecen in Hungary, and then also Taujen has two, one in Poland and one in Latvia. But according to my information, so this is not that many. You could have even more sister cities. But the thing is, this is very dependent from the central government in Taiwan. So this is why it's slightly slow and takes really some time. But this could definitely start some cooperation. And also what I have presented earlier, it would also raise the mutual awareness that it's really not on such a good level yet.
Great. Anyone else? Jakob?
I think at the end, it's really about the number of people, first in the general establishment and second in the political establishment only in the particular country, how many of them really want to do something with Taiwan. Because in many cases, I mean, in the Czech case, it started as a very small group around the Senate speaker, around then mayor of Prague. So very small groups, which actually extended to what now is approximately 200 people who are actually on the Czech side, willing and trying to find ways how to engage with Taiwan, from the presidential office to some of the local mayors who are, for example, now going to be accompanying the Czech parliamentary Czech chamber speaker to Taiwan. So I think that's the indicator in many ways. Obviously, what matters is the strength of it, who is the presidential office and who are, let's say, local representatives. But at the end, this is something what allows the let's say the economic cooperation in some ways, because for example, the business associations are pretty much interlinked and dependent on the trade ministries in most countries, because their interests are basically represented at the government level by the trade ministry. So basically, if the trade ministry silently tells the business association leaders, "Don't do Taiwan, China will be too angry to you," they will just shut up and do nothing. This is exactly what happened in 2020, for example, when the Czech Senate speaker went to Taiwan for the first time. There was no major Czech business relevant to it, and the business associations, the big ones, were staying away. This time they are going because they actually see the political green light, not from individual ministers, but the government, the president, and it's to paraphrase it's like a united front on the good side, which we'll see if the expectations are met. But I think this kind of snowball effect actually pays off politically, because it allows then also practical cooperation. For example, the defense universities between Czech Republic and Taiwan working with each other. That's only possible if the defense minister says yes. Or when the heads of the intelligence agencies are traveling to Taiwan, it usually takes the minister or prime minister to approve it. So it takes the political decisions to allow these things to happen. And at least in the Czech case, it's happening now.
Back to Christina.
I just want to add that in case of the Czech Republic, this is really quite special if you compare it to the other CEE countries. And also our research has shown, and you can see it also in our Taiwan tracker, that usually the engagement is on the side of the parliament. So there's a lot of parliamentary engagement, but not so much on other levels. So also in the case of the Czech Republic, it will be very interesting to observe what the new Czech president is going to do, because after the election, he said he wants to welcome the Taiwanese president in the Czech Republic. But then following this, like there was a moderation of his language, because I think he will be slightly more cautious in his next step, because as a follow-up, he said, at first he said that he would visit Taiwan, and then later on he said that he would welcome the Taiwanese president. So let's really see what happens, but it's definitely exciting.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, as you guys have made very clear, the Czech Republic's a really interesting case. I mean, it really has experienced sort of the full breadth of this transition, away from China a bit and more towards a much more openness to Taiwan. So it's been really interesting to watch. I want to turn now to our audience, and I'm going to start off with one of my coworkers at GTI, our executive director, Russell Shao, who brings up really one of the elephants in the room again, which, again, is the Ukraine war and how this is influencing CEE states, thoughts on China and Taiwan. And in particular, he asks, there's obviously growing concerns about the possibility of a military conflict in the Taiwan Strait. There's discussion in Washington where it increasingly looks at all the tools available to deter China from engaging in any sort of military aggression. So that includes, not just military, but also diplomatic, informational, economic means as well. He's curious to hear, what role could CE countries play in deterring a military conflict in the Taiwan Strait? Are there specific levers they could pull that could, maybe beyond military, like economic or diplomatic, that could help deter China? And just to tack on a question of my own to that, to what degree are CE states really linking, the war in Ukraine to a potential conflict in the Taiwan Strait? You mentioned that this has soured Taiwanese or CE countries' opinions on China a bit. But again, there's the question again, does that correlate to, potential more support for deterring China from Taiwan? And again, Jakob?
I mean, in the case of for example, Czech institutions engaging Taiwan, I think the scale where we are now is first there is pretty much about sharing the private or non-public assessments of the PLA's capabilities. That's exactly what the defense universities can be talking to each other about. But in the case of what's practically possible is that there is quite a huge interest from Taiwan to Central European defense sector, defense companies, because there are many things which actually Taiwanese companies would like to purchase in our region. But the usual problem is that you need to get an export license to be able to sell it. And most Europeans are unwilling to do it because of the fear of Chinese retribution or economic coercion. But there have been some of the talks, and it's ongoing. Much of it is still private. How much some of the Czech defense companies could export to Taiwan in particular weapon systems as well. So some of it was already made public. The discussions are ongoing. I think it will take time, but this is clearly the focus of some of the defense engagement which we might have. I would not overestimate it. Obviously, US will always be the main supplier of weapon systems to Taiwan and ammunitions, but they are things which might make sense. For example, UAVs, drones as well. They are these companies which are talking to each other already. So that's one option. The second option in the future, and that's still far away, are joint exercises of militaries. Obviously, they don't need to be fully happening in Taiwan, but what's possible is that there are engagements, for example, for the Czech military, which is doing some joint trainings with specific militaries from Asia as well. Some of it might be happening in the future. It will take time. Much of it likely will not be public. I think it will be kind of symbolic at the beginning. But that's exactly one of the efforts to actually learn, for example, from a total defense concept of some of the Central Eastern European countries, which is something what Taiwanese military is being pushed to actually adjust inside the Taiwan's defense posture. But there are a lot of disagreements on political level inside Taiwan, how to actually change the defense posture in the response to lessons from Ukraine. Basically, how the Russian war in Ukraine changes how Taiwan should be defending itself on the land, not really at sea. And the last thing I would mention is that the role of countries in Europe in the defense of Taiwan is actually the pre-deterrence in the political and economic sense as well. That's why actually President Tsai is building this political coalition or diplomatic coalition of democratic countries, because it's pretty clear that Central Eastern European countries cannot really help militarily in defense of Taiwan. We basically we have no navies or very little, and we have very limited air force. So what really could we do practically? But what we can do is to make sure that the CCP leadership knows that attacking Taiwan would actually kill the chances for strategic relations between China and countries in Europe. And that's something what actually can play some role in the calculus of the CCP leadership in the future. It will not be the decisive phenomenon. It will not be the decisive factor. That obviously will be the military part with the US and Japan and the subsequent calculations which the CCP leadership will do. But that's the role Europeans can play. to effectively make sure that the Chinese government knows that if they attack Taiwan, even for a possible blockade, their European countries will be willing to actually press China economically, not in a sense of crushing China with economic sanctions, but actually with killing Chinese political interests in Europe. But if we are not there at all, we are in a situation where the German political leadership is bringing the leaders of their business to Beijing to actually kneel to the dictator. That's more or less the European policy on China at this moment. We are not decreasing our dependence on China. We're actually not doing much in this regard. So once China starts attacking us, they will squeeze us economically, and Europe will effectively do nothing if it happens tomorrow. So I think there is a lot of effort which we need to put into it. And honestly, I think it is a main homework for Europeans in regards to China policy to decrease the economic dependency, so we cannot be really squeezed when the conflict starts, because then it's too late.
Sure, I definitely agree that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, particularly from the German side. The Zeitenfunde hasn't really materialized quite yet. Agnes, you had a question?
Well, I just wanted to add that although I'm an economist, so I'm not an expert of such topics, but I expect something similar that happens now. So in case China would attack Taiwan, probably the Hungarian stance would be pretty much the similar, unfortunately, as in the case of the current Russia's war in Ukraine. That is, they wouldn't really be involved and would rather be sidelined in any type of negotiations. But I don't think that it would be true for the rest of the region, but it would be true in particular for Hungary and Serbia, that they wouldn't really put any pressure on China, but would like to stay out of the business.
Sure, I think that's definitely an important consideration there. I want to turn now to a question from one of our friends, one of Jakob's co-workers at EVC, Marcin Józefski, based over in the EVC Taipei office. This is specifically for Christina. I wanted to learn a little bit more about the sampling that you used for your surveys in Central and Eastern Europe when it comes to China and Taiwan.
Okay, so our surveys were nationally representative with over 1,300 respondents everywhere. They were nationally representative in terms of gender, age, and region. They were conducted online, not directly by us, but by agencies. It was coordinated by a Czech agency, and then there was a collaboration in each of these countries where this survey was conducted. Any more specific questions on this?
No, I think that covers it, and I think you covered a broad swath of the society. It's interesting. Well, I want to turn now to a question from Dave Stillwell, who asks a question that I think I direct towards Philip, and it's something that you've addressed a little bit earlier. What are the chances that the 16+1 becomes much more irrelevant going forward? What are the odds? You presented those three scenarios. Curious to hear what circumstances would lead to a kind of complete deterioration of the 16+1, or are you really erring on the side of that it will continue to persist in some way or form?
Yeah, so I mean, after China's tacit support for Russia, I don't really see what worse could happen in terms of China's approach to the region. Of course, some specific actions. Of course, military support for Russia. That's something that's been discussed. I still don't see that as likely. So, of course, China could go further in that respect, and that might be a red line. I don't know, even maybe for Poland, let's say. But I feel like there's not many countries see it that way, and I think there's some sense to that. There's not really any sense, in rocking the boat too much. And you just you have this format. There's something happening. You still keep the communication lines open. But there's no really any new major initiative coming from that. I mean, I would be interested, just purely out of interest, what China will do going forward in terms of bringing something new to the table, because it seems there's been some efforts to offer some concessions, for example, to give opportunities to Central and Eastern European countries, agriculture product exporters, to establish themselves on the Chinese market. But this is not really, such a major part of most of the countries' experts that this would, change really the whole state of the play. So right now, I think it's actually smart for China to really keep it low profile, to not have that many meetings where we could actually have countries not participating. So when you take it down the notch and have it on not the highest political level, then it's also easier for countries to somehow keep being involved without that much political capital being put in. So I don't think it's going to dissolve unless some really major thing happens. I cannot really envision that any particular scenario apart from direct Chinese military assistance to Russia.
That makes sense. Well, Jakob, did you want to say something?
Just briefly, it's a zombie format. Basically, nothing really happens. From what we hear when these meetings are happening, it's very formal. It's just everybody listening to each other from the kind of CE countries, who is saying what, who is the most submissive one. We always know is Hungary, but outside of that, nothing really happens in those meetings. So I think we should basically kill it diplomatically. I think it will happen in the future because there is nothing China really brings to the table, and if they do it bilaterally. They go and approach the proxies of Viktor Orban in Hungary, for example, or specific people in particular countries, even in Ukraine as well, which is obviously outside of it. But it goes bilaterally. This format actually is more formal at this moment and pretty empty. I think it's pretty understood that way. Yeah.
Great. Well, I think I agree with that. I want to close things out a little bit. I think we got time for one or two more questions. I want to go around the room real quick and look to the future a bit. I think a lot of our talk thus far has been on, the recent past, the current state of affairs. I do want to look forward to what is Taiwan's position going to look like in a couple of years? Is this current trend towards Taiwan going to continue? Is it going to kind of plateau at a certain point? Will China push back? Curious to hear from all of you from your various, places nationally, your areas of expertise. What do you see for Taiwan in the future? And are there specific ways that Taiwan can kind of strengthen its position here, can capitalize on this wave of support in CEE states? So maybe we'll start with Agnes.
Yeah, probably from the economic perspective, as I've already mentioned, if Taiwanese companies would target other sectors, other than manufacturing, assembly, that would be something different from the rest of the multinational companies' activities in Central and Eastern Europe, and that could have a positive spillover effect to other terrains of cooperation, including political relations. When it comes to my country's background, so the Hungarian position, that pretty much depends on who's going to be in charge. So whether there's going to be a new government elected, because with the current government, I do not expect considerable change in Hungarian Taiwanese relations, but with a new government potentially coming from the current opposition, I would expect a more balanced type of relationship in the triangle of Hungary, China, and Taiwan.
Interesting. Great. Christina?
So in my opinion, this trend will continue for a while for sure. What happens in the far future remains to be seen. But I think also the Russian aggression in Ukraine has highlighted a little bit of a values-based political leaning. And so this is why I assume that there will be a trend of continuing relations with Taiwan. Then we also have the national politics aspect. So it also depends from country to country what happens in politics nationally. And then also, thirdly, it depends also whether Taiwan will deliver economically, because as we have seen, there has been disillusionment with China by several countries in the region. So, Taiwan has to be careful not to slip into such a position too, because that would really change things.
Great. All right. Philip?
Yeah. So I think it's quite obvious that for Taiwan, like it's informal, not non-official relationships are getting more and more important. I mean, we just heard today another country might soon switch to the People's Republic, Honduras. So it's very obvious that that's where the future for Taiwan, also for kind of creating its international space, lies. If I mean, we can also, there can very well be a political change in Taiwan, so that's also one factor to definitely consider in that context. And in general, I think for CE countries, especially those leading countries as the Czech Republic, it's going to be important to really also put Taiwan higher on the European agenda, because were many, and Jakub mentioned that the role of these countries really in deterring China and any kind of conflict in the Taiwan Strait is really political mostly. So we also need to translate this relationship that they have built with Taiwan into some positive agenda on the European level. And you're hearing just these days, there's a lot of not fear maybe, but cautiousness about, for example, opening the investment agreement negotiations with Taiwan. So there's a lot of space for these countries to really get involved in these discussions, to really use this proactively on the European level. So that this is what we should be looking forward also in the future, not just looked on the bilateral level, but translating this into a more structural approach that will change like the major policies.
Sure, and you're right, we haven't even addressed really the European dynamic of this and the broader continent-wide approach to this and where CE fits into that. So that's another topic that's very worthy of delving into. To wrap things up, Jakub?
I think there are four things which we'll be seeing. One, whether Taiwan will be able to actually deliver to those who they see as preferential allies, like Czech Republic or Lithuania. So those governments in Prague or Vilnius will be able to sell domestically the relationship that it pays off economically and structurally as well. It's not only symbolic, nice move for which we are paying because of the Chinese response, but if that's something what we like to do. And it will become a state policy, not only one minister's policy, for example, as basically it is in Lithuania these days. So that's the case. That's one question. The second thing is that we will see a big split among the EU member states, because I doubt that there would be any major changes in the German position on China. There are so many good reasons why there should be one, but it's not happening. We see basically the German state not only trying to increase their dependency on China, but also basically giving up on their national security posture as well, inviting effectively Chinese intelligence companies into the critical infrastructure like railway systems. And that's all happens at the same time when NATO really is telling Germany that they are endangering the whole Europe because of the role of Germany in transitioning places as well. So I doubt there will be major positive changes, which means that the supply chains going through Germany to other smaller countries in Central Eastern Europe will be the main tool for China to exert pressure and actually blackmail countries in Central Eastern Europe through German supply chains or Germany-driven supply chains of the big companies. That's what we see already happening now, and I think it will be the main tool of the Chinese economic coercion toolkit in the future. And the last thing I would mention, which we don't really discuss these days, will be the Chinese role in Ukraine, because that's something what China is trying to do to effectively push themselves into the future reconstruction process of Ukraine. There are many in the Ukraine government who are willing to accept the Chinese money because they hope for it, and that's something what will be a major factor for us in the whole relationships in Central Eastern Europe. Not bilaterally, but because everybody in Europe, I mean almost everybody in Europe, invested so much into defense of Ukraine, and if the Ukraine government would be willing to effectively accept strategic influence of China in Ukraine, that's something what will play very negatively and will be a big issue for everybody, including countries like Poland or the Baltic countries. But that's something what will happen a couple of years from now. That's not on the table today.
Sure. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap things up. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to share your really amazing expertise on what's really an increasingly important discussion. I'm so glad to have you all here when we're here. I think this is an issue that's really in the midst of change. And I think you all capture the dynamics that are really shaping this change as we look forward. So I want to thank all of you again, and I look forward to engaging with all of you in the future. And thank you to all our audience members for joining us.